Okay, this is going to be a very brief presentation about contextual data. So we have several types of contextual data, and I'll distinguish them by how easy it is to link them to the survey data. The easiest one is any sort of data that you have with a state identifier. You can link them directly because the UAS has a state variable in the data, so that doesn't really require any further action. Then for the COVID tracking data, we have already done linking to a number of external variables, like, for example, local policies. And there they may be at a different level, but they have been linked already. So you just, if you go to the website, you see something called external data. If you look at the COVID website, and what you will see that the UAS ID makes it possible to link immediately, and it will get you the external data for the date that the survey was answered by the respondent. It gets a little more complicated if you want to link to data that have more fine-grained geographic identification. And under certain conditions, and Jill mentioned this earlier, I think, we can do it for you. So we can use data that you have on something, let's say by county, and we link it for you, and we give you the data back with the linked contextual data. But you only do this in cases where the data you deliver is relatively coarse. So if it's too easy to reverse engineer and just say, oh, I didn't know the county, but I know exactly what the pollution was in the county, and now the pollution is linked to the individual, now we know which county the individual is living in, we try to prevent that. So then that we don't do. So we only do it in cases where the data are sufficiently coarse, and it's a custom-made solution that we'll then talk about with anyone who has an interest. And as you may imagine, we'll charge a little bit for it. So then if that doesn't work, so if the data are more fine-grained, then we get into the enclave, and that's another thing that Jill talked about. And so that contains several geocoded variables. I'll talk about this. I'll just give a list a little later. And typically these are at the census tract level, not always, but most of them are at the census tract level. So if you have data at the central tract level, then you can link them in the enclave. In addition, we anticipate adding several other sensitive data types that we have collected. For example, we have financial transaction data that are collected for a subset of the sample, and they're very fine-grained. And we don't make this available generally, but under certain conditions, one can use them in the enclave. And also, you can then also add your own geocoded data to the enclave. So if you have geocoded data, of the kind that I mentioned, that's fine-grained, you can add them to the enclave and then link them there and do your analysis in the enclave. So here are some links. So here's where you can find them. So the linkage variables in the enclave are the UAS ID, obviously, because that's the identifier for the individual. And then moreover, there is like an identifier that's specific to the external data, which essentially is the time, because if you have data that vary over time, then you want to know the time. But of course, some of the background data are not time varying, and then it's just the UAS ID, because then you don't need the time variable to further determine exactly what you need. And there is a manual that of which I've listed the link here. This is the current list of the data that we put in the enclave. It's pretty self-explanatory. The thing that struck me when I looked at it is that some of them are pretty old, so we're still working on updating them. And contextual data tend to be older often because it takes a while before external organizations produce the data. For example, EPA produces air quality data, but it does it like once a year in November. So often you are a little later. Some of the other geocoded data needs a fair bit of processing, so it takes more computer work by whatever organization is doing. So they're not always quite up to date, but we certainly try to make them as up to date as possible. And this is only a start. We'll add as many as we can. And again, you're welcome to add your own geocoded data whenever you have them. Thank you.